Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Stephanie McMillan, and I bring you greetings on behalf of the Health Committee of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Columbia, South Carolina chapter. Thank you all for joining us this evening on a much needed candid conversation, Breaking the Cycle, Generational Trauma. The purpose of the Health Committee is to be a vital component of a thriving community. NCBW is concerned about the well being of the whole community and the whole person, meaning physically, emotionally, and spiritually. For tonight's presentation, I will be introducing members of the Health Committee that will be doing the presentation, and then I will introduce our speaker. But before we get started, there are some housekeeping rules stuff to go over. Please always remain muted throughout the presentation. We do have a Q&A section at the end of our presentation where you may ask your questions. You may also write your questions in the chat, and they will be asked during that Q&A section. The topic we are discussing may resonate with some. Um, so please take care of yourself by you could turn your camera off, take a couple of deep breaths, or sipping some cold water before returning to the presentation. We want you to return because closer to the end, we will be discussing some resources within the community. Now, our first moderator is my sister, Tamika Gathers, who is a dedicated school based licensed professional counselor associate with the Kershaw County School District, with a deep-seated passion for community service. She is particularly devoted to making a difference in the lives of educated youth and children in foster care. Her commitment to these often overlooked groups is both inspiring and impactful. Our second moderator is my sister Taronda Jackson, who is also our first VP, Vice President, and she is a licensed professional counselor. She is the owner of True Light Counseling Consultant, where she serves Columbia and the surrounding communities. She works extensively with women and girls to find their purpose and self worth. She is also committed to helping others to understand the dark times of life that perpetrate generational cycles and stuck points. Last is myself, Dr. Stephanie McMillan, and I am a licensed professional counselor as I work as a multidimensional family therapy therapist for Columbia Area Mental Health Clinic with the Children and Adolescents and Family Services, where I serve adolescents and families that are affiliated through the Department of Juvenile Justice or at a high risk of out of home placement. I work closely and intensively with the families up to 2 to 3 times a week, for at least a good 5 to 6 months, um, and also building relationship with community partners and schools that are involved with that youth. Generational trauma and gaps are major topics that are discussed with the parents. I'm also a registered play therapist, and I utilize that to develop creative interventions and methods for my families to address those issues surrounding generational trauma and gaps. Now, before we dive into our presentation of the topic, we want to make sure that you have a good foundation for trauma. So, we want you to know that generational trauma refers to the transmission of trauma from one generation to the next. It can manifest in various forms, including psychological, behavioral, and social effects. Understanding generational trauma is crucial for addressing its impacts on individual, families, and communities, as it also allows us to grasp the effects of historical and systemic injustice and better support healing and resilience within the community. So, this presentation will explore the definition, mechanisms, effects, and implications of generational trauma within the African American community, diving into its historical roots and contemporary manifestations. We examine the psychological effects and strategies for healing. Like I said, with our moderators, we all have different backgrounds. We come from the school based perspective, we're going to come from the private practice perspective, and we also will come from the outpatient, community based outpatient perspective in talking about the topic of generational trauma. So I'm going to now turn it over to Sister Tamika.
Good evening, everyone. So today we're going to focus on understanding generational trauma. Generational trauma refers to the transmission of trauma from one generation to the next, often resulting from experiences of oppression, violence, and discrimination. Trauma can impact individuals psychologically, physiologically, and also influence your parenting styles, your family dynamics, your cultural practices, therefore perpetuating its effects across your generations. Lastly, by recognizing the generational trauma, we can begin to address its underlying causes and work towards healing and resilience. Historical trauma. So historical trauma is rooted in slavery, segregation, lynching, and other forms of systemic racism that have been inflicted deep wounds on African American individuals and families throughout history. The legacy of historical trauma continues to shape the experiences and the opportunities of African Americans today, contributing to the disparities in health, education, wealth, and social justice. Together, we recommend that you all take a look at the book Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which is called Slavery PTSD for short, also by Dr. DeGroy, Joy DeGroy. And you can find that book on Amazon or at your local bookstore. Contemporary manifestations. So today in 2024, we can see effects of generational trauma through mass incarceration, economic inequality, racial discrimination in various sectors, and police brutality. Barriers to a resolution. So the first one we have here is the stigma. It's the stigma surrounding mental health issues in the African American communities, that we've all heard them and how some African Americans are reluctant to find help. Also, the stigma can be cultural as well as passed down from generation, because also with that stigma, some people resort to their beautician, going to church, or anything where they feel like they're getting the help needed versus seeking mental health. We have a lack of access to mental health services. Some people live out in rural areas where they don't have access, or they don't have the medical benefits to seek the services. So we have that gap also in our community. Historical trauma and distrust. Like I said before in the historical slide, sometimes the mistrust of seeking mental health is passed down through generation through systemic racism, medical racism, or unethical practices that have happened to our forefathers before us. So again, with that being passed down, that's how it's historical distrust. Social economic inequities, we have that such as poverty, unemployment, housing instability can exacerbate the effects of generational trauma and limit individuals' ability to access resources. Cultural mistrust. Again, that's including schools, the healthcare system, government agencies, all of that again is passed down through generational trauma. Lack of culturally responsive care. So again, you know, here in this presentation, we have 3 licensed therapists, but some people aren't prone to go to a therapist because they don't look like us, or people may feel that they can't tell them what they went through because they don't share the same cultural backgrounds. Also, we have intersectional identity. That includes race, gender, sexual orientation, and social and economic status, can create a unique barrier addressing generational trauma. The psychological impact. Generational trauma can affect us through our emotional needs. Symptoms can be avoidance, numbing, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Some behavioral effects that we've seen would be maladaptive behaviors. That means like social isolation, substance abuse, self-harming and aggression, and a lack of coping skills. Societal effects would be affected through poverty, violence, systemic oppression within communities, perpetuating social inequities. And lastly, we have interpersonal relationships that can be strained through generational trauma. And that can lead to issues of mistrust, communication barriers, conflict resolution challenges, in addition to struggles with identity formation, self-esteem, and cultural pride.
Sister Taronda, would you like to talk about your experience in private practice with any of those?
Absolutely. I think in the private sector, I wanted to touch on briefly what Tamika mentioned earlier about the stigma that's attached to a person who feels like they need therapy or, hey, I need some help. They are often mislabeled, there's such a stigma attached to getting therapy. And I hate to say that, I hate saying the word, but, oh, I'm not crazy, and it's not that you're crazy. It's just that you have places where you actually get stuck in life and you don't understand what's going on. But attending, webinars such as this brings to the attention in the forefront, there's nothing wrong with therapy. And it's a place where you can go to get help with somebody who is trained in these areas, somebody who you can trust, somebody who you can talk to, who will understand and help you understand yourself, even when you don't. So, and even when you talk about the emotional effects, people that are experiencing trauma, that can be a lifelong process. A lot of times, it's generational. When Sister Tamika was talking about historical, it's passed down from generation to generation. Those misbeliefs of what happens in Big Mama's house stays in Big Mama's house. And it's very traumatic for some individuals, and they never tell. But trauma, behavioral effects, trauma manifests in adaptive behavior, of course, the maladaptive behaviors, but then you see people who, I thought about juvenile delinquency. You see those young men and women who consistently get in trouble. I've had a few cases here in South Carolina where I worked with the DJJ and they were court mandated to come to a therapist, and I was one of the agencies that they used. And it is really amazing how these kids come in here really with the misconception that there's something wrong with telling people how you really feel. So, and I think these webinars like this are very important. It dispels the myths about therapy and it makes people comfortable with being able to share. Thank you.
Thank you. And I like to piggyback off of what you said, because that's part of and I think we all do it when we have our clients or we have a family that we're working with, is trying to break those barriers down to get them to buy into therapy. And I've had those conversations, especially with parents, and that's when I recognize this is a generational pattern that has been passed down, that they now has passed on to their children. But then at the same time, looking at that generational gap, because back then we didn't have social media, we didn't have a lot of this technology stuff. So I have to also bring that into the conversation, that where now is in your face with this new generation. Some of this stuff we didn't hear of. We always just saw it, this person went this way, or this person, you just didn't see them no more. Where now you're talking about facilities, inpatient services, counseling, and that religion piece. I have parents who literally would tell the child just to pray about it. And we're living in a society where, yes, that is good. You're supposed to, but in their world, if that's not their belief, we have to learn how to work with those things. And like I said, I work with a lot of kids that are affiliated with DJJs, so I see a lot of the substance use, which is generational. Some of them you can see history wise having family members with substance use disorders or alcohol use disorders, being passed down, the history of aggression, violence, even looking at the community that they're in. So having this type of conversation really does help put it more to the forefront so we can be more aware of what we carry into our relationships with our children, um, nieces, nephews, and everything.
Can I make one more comment about the interpersonal relationships? You kind of sparked something in my mind when you were talking about it. I just wanted to say that one of the things that I've found in the private sector is that interpersonal relationships are affected a great deal when it comes down to generational trauma, because usually if the child comes in with this belief, like you said, then there's the parent, and then you talk to the parent and you understand that this was the belief from their parents and then their great grandparents and grandparents. And so what this thing does is that it creates cycles of generational dysfunction. And that's the word that came to my mind when you were talking. And they become comfortable living in dysfunction. It becomes their new normal. And then they take this as adults and they take it into their own marriages, their own relationships, and all this is passed down to their children. And so this is why it is so important to get help at an early age. And before you get married, heal yourself. Before you go and find a relationship, heal yourself. It's so important to heal yourself before you try to connect with anyone else. Know who you are and heal yourself.
Sister Tamika, would you like to chime in with the school base?
Well, yeah, in school base, I see generational trauma in forms of behavioral issues. That's like verbal, physical aggression, problems with authority figures, poor academic performance, emotional instability. A lot of the kids are hypervigilant, always thinking something is going to happen. They're very impulsive. Sometimes they lack emotional regulation. Sometimes with a few of the kids that I work with, I've seen some somatic complaints about ailments that does not exist, but again, generational. And then I've seen some on the other end of the spectrum that want to be perfectionists or overachievers. So I see it in the school-based setting in various different forms.
Thank you. So now we're going to have our speaker, and I would like to introduce her. Miss Denise Childs turned to NAMI NYC Metro for help in January of 2004. That was 2 weeks after her daughter Lucy was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and depression. A single immigrant mother at that time, Denise decided to educate herself about her daughter's condition, particularly since she was finding the existence of mental illness was not talked about in her Caribbean culture. Inspired by what she had learned, she soon went back to school to attain her associate's degree in early childhood education while volunteering at NAMI. After demonstrating strong leadership skills and a passion for helping others, in 2008, Denise became one of the first NAMI basic teachers. Her commitment to the program led to her hire in January 2010 as NAMI NYC Metro's program coordinator. Denise is also a certified support specialist as well as a state trainer and national trainer for NAMI Basic, NAMI peer-to-peer, and NAMI support groups. Denise is also an In Our Own Voice, Ending the Silence, and Family and Friends presenter, as well as a teacher for NAMI Basic, NAMI Family to Family, NAMI Peer to Peer, and NAMI Homefront. Denise serves as the program director at NAMI NYC Metro for 8 years, where she oversaw the Family Support Liaison Center citywide contract. She has taught over 5,000 classes and graduated over 12,000 parents and professionals. She also worked closely with the Manhattan VA in training and supporting families of children and adolescents whose parents have been deployed. Denise has been instrumental in NAMI's NYC Metro use of NAMI Basic to train workers in the child welfare and foster care system. She is also a parent advocate in the mental health systems. She was given the very first NAMI Basic Leadership Award in 2011. She is honored to assist family members find the support, respect, and service that they deserve. In 2017, Denise joined NAMI South Carolina family as the Midlands Ending the Silence coordinator. In 2021, Denise was promoted to the manager's position, overseeing the Midlands and PD region. Denise is now serving as the statewide bilingual program director.
Thank you, guys. That's a long bio. But thank you, guys, and thank you for having me. So again, as you mentioned, my name is Denise Chi, and beside all that, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm an aunt, sister, a friend. I'm also someone living with a mental health condition, which stems from generational trauma. And you guys are going to hear a little bit about my story in the minutes that I have. I'm also a survivor, and I used to call myself a victim, but I'm no longer a victim. So I'm a survivor of domestic violence and of sexual assault. And I'm a Black woman on a healing journey, because healing is a journey. For me, it's a journey. It's not something that could happen overnight. So a little bit about what got me to this part. So I was raised in, and I heard somebody mention it, whatever happens in Big Mama's house stays in Big Mama's house. And so I was raised in this household that way. Whatever happens in this house stays in this house, right? We are not allowed to share our feelings. We're not allowed to talk about how we feel. We're not allowed to share, my grandmother would say, our dirty laundry. So don't go there and talk to strangers about what's happening in this house. So my father was an alcoholic, and my mother was his punching bag. And my sister and I, we had front row seats. My sister set up to this day, she can't remember. We're 11 months apart, but I could remember it like it happened yesterday. My dad would come home almost every night drunk, and I would just hear my mother's screams in the other room, right? And for me, that was normal because that's all I knew. I knew Daddy was going to come home. As soon as he walked through that door, I knew exactly, the sounds that are going to coming from either the bedroom or the kitchen. And even some days, I would like cover my ears not to hear my mother's crying. There was nothing I could do about it. I remember neighbors would come over and they would get my mom, or they would take her away for a while, and she would always find her way back, right? I'm not sure where she would go, but she would stay away for like maybe a day or two, and then my mom would come back and everything would happen all over again, right? So fast forward a couple of years, one day I remember someone came and they took my mom and my younger sister, and they took them. Nobody asked, nobody said where they went or where they were going. I remember I wasn't allowed to ask questions, so I just stood there and I watched them, took my mom and my younger sister away, and they never came back. I waited 2 days, I waited 3 days, and never came back. I can't ask where they were because I wasn't allowed to ask questions. And at that time, we were living with my grandparents from my father's side. So 3 months after my mom and my sister left, my dad came home one day and he said to me, because my dad he used to play in a band. He used to play the piano in a band. And he said to me, my band is going on tour, he said, and I'm not sure when I'll be back. He said, and so I was there, standing. That's the first time I asked a question. I said, can I go with you? Because my mom is gone, my sister is gone, and my dad's going away now. My grandparents are elderly. I wanted to go with my dad. And I asked him, I said, can I go with you? And he said to me, he said, no. He said, I'm sorry. He said, where I'm going, it's no place for a little girl. He said, and moreover, your grandparents needs you. And so I said, okay, I didn't ask any more questions. He said, but I'll come back for you. He said, don't worry, I'll come back for you. And he never did. So that was my first huge disappointment. He never did. So a few months after my parents left, my dad's gone, my mom's gone. I don't know where my mom went. My sister is gone. I'm there with my grandparents. I was sexually abused by one of my cousins. And again, I couldn't say anything, right? Again, I thought that was normal. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't, tell anyone because he even told me, he said, no one is going to believe you. You better keep quiet because, if you say anything, I'm going to say you're lying and nobody likes a little girl that tells a lie. Nobody's going to believe you. So I kept all that stuff in. Fast forward a couple of months, I would say 6 or 8 months, um, my grandmother died. And so I was left with my grandfather. And of course, he was elderly, he couldn't really care for me. And so my grandparents from my mother's side came and they took me away. They said, you're going to come live with us. Your grandfather, somebody's going to come take care of him. You're going to come live with us. And that's when I found out where my mom was. Apparently they took my mom and they put her in a plane and they sent her to New York. Because in other words, one of the ladies told me that's the only way they could have got my mom away from my dad, because they tried to take her away to another house and she would always find her way back to my dad. And so that's the only way they could have got her away from my dad. And then, I'm waiting for my dad to come look for me. My dad didn't come and look for me. He was gone. I didn't see him, didn't know where he was. And so by that time I was like 15 going on 16. And so, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm grown, I want to get out this house. I want to have a life. I want to get married. I want to have a kid. And so I get married at the age of 16. That was my first marriage at the age of 16. And again, my then that was the first night, the first time that I actually felt the back of someone's hand. Because on my wedding night, he came home and I asked him, I said, where you been? That's the question I asked after the reception. And I went home, he sent me home, and then he came home like late at night. And I asked him, I said, it's our wedding night, where you been? And that's the first time I felt the back of his hand. And he said, you belong to me now. You don't ask me no questions. You don't ask me where I've been. I'm the one that asks all the questions. And I remember my dad used to say that to my mom. And that's why my dad used to say, you ask too much questions. I'm the head of this household. You don't ask any questions. When I come home, I need my food on the table. I need my clothes to be cleaned. You don't ask me where I've been, when I'm going to come back. And my mom always used to ask these questions. And that's where, my dad would hit her, would beat her. And so, like I said, that's all I knew. So I'm like, okay, that's normal. And then I'm here, I was raised with also, listen to your elderly. And so I'm listening to everyone around me, family members, church members, the elders. Some people are telling me if he doesn't hit you, he doesn't love you. Right. And so I'm living with, oh, he's loving the crap out of me because he's hitting me. Um, if he's jealous because he loves you and he don't want nobody else to look at you, you're his property. Right. Back in those days, and I'm from the Caribbean, if you guys don't hear my accent, but in those days when I was growing up, women are not allowed to work. We're not allowed to work. So the men are working and the men would come home and bring the money and buy the groceries. And if women want anything, we would have to ask permission. Can I get some money? Can I get a pair of shoes? Can I get we would have to, that's the way I was raised. So here am I at the age of 16, had my daughter at the age of 17. And the only thing I knew about marriage is what I saw with my mom and my dad. So I'm like, okay, this guy is loving me. He loves me. He tells me, whose friend I can see, how to dress, when to go, when to come, what to say, what not to say. And again, that's all I saw my mom and my dad did. So I'm like, okay, this is normal, right? That's what I thought that it was normal. But it took me years to really, really understand and really kind of like realize that it wasn't healthy, because I remember doing some negative coping skills, right? I start drinking. My dad used to drink. So I'm like, okay, maybe if I, take a drink, all the pain is gonna go away. So I start drinking. I start doing all those self-harming stuff. I start cutting. I start self-harming myself just to kind of ease the pain. Right. And I knew I needed help. I wasn't sure what help looked like and where to go, because I keep hearing in the back of my mind, or hearing these voices saying, don't tell your business to total strangers. Whatever happens in this house stays in this house, right? Nobody's supposed to know. So all the stuff that was going on, I was keeping it, down, keeping it inside. And so a lot of people always, and I want to talk about storms. I want to talk a little bit about storms in your life, because a lot of people would say, and I've heard people say, I'm going through a terrible storm. Not all storm comes to destroy you. Some storms would come to clear the path and show you the way. And my storm came in the form of a hurricane. And this hurricane came, and I was on the island, and we lost everything. And that was my escape out, because I knew I wanted to leave. I just wasn't sure, where am I going to go with a child? I'm only 17 years old. I'm not allowed to work. So what am I going to do? Where I'm going to go? Right. And so this storm came. It didn't come when I was 17. I went through, I was with him for 9 years. And so finally the storm came, the hurricane came, and we lost everything. And that was the storm that kind of cleared the path for me. I'm like, this is my way out. My mom was in New York, and I remember my mom called, and my mom said, come to New York. I have a job for you, she said. And I'm like, yes, thank you, Lord. This is my way out. And I called him on the phone, and that was the very first time as well that I didn't ask him any permission. I called him on the phone, and I said, I am leaving for New York in 2 days. And he said to me, well, if you leave my parents' house, don't come back. And I said, thank you. And that was the hardest decision I had to make. But I knew that I have a child to take care of. And I knew that within that 9 years that I was with him, I was, the cycle continued. I was treating my child the same way they treated me. Right. And so because that's all I knew. And the same way I had front row seat when my dad was using my mom as a punching bag. My daughter had front row seat in my domestic marriage. And I didn't want her to feel or go through what I went through without having a voice to share or to talk about what's going on. And so to make a long story short, I left. I packed my stuff. And the hardest thing for me was to leave her behind, because I had to leave her for at least a year, because school, even though we had the hurricane, school was on, right? And they wouldn't give me a visa to bring her over here. But I left her with her grandmother, and I came to New York, and I worked. I had a vision, I had a plan. I was going to end the cycle of the abuse and the alcohol, and the control. And again, some members, or some members of my family would say that, oh, if he doesn't, abuse is only if he hits you. So I'm hearing both ways. I'm hearing one side is saying, if he doesn't hit you, he doesn't love you. I'm hearing the other side saying, well, he's not being abusive to you because he's not hitting you. So it's going back and forth. And so I had to make that decision for myself and for my child to end that cycle. Right. And that, like I said, that was the hardest thing. But I made a decision. I got on the plane. My mom sent a cousin for me, and I got on the plane. And once I got to New York, I started working, and I had this one vision. I got to get my child, and I got to start a better life for me and for my child. And I remember working. I worked for almost a year and a half for $3 an hour, just to make enough salary to save up enough money. And my mom went, and she got my daughter. And that's when my daughter, we started a new life in New York. But I heard you guys mention earlier that, stuff like these stay with you sometimes for a lifetime. And I'm 51 years of age now, and I still have, issues with trust. I trusted my father to say he was going to come back for me. He didn't. I still have low self-esteem of words that they would say to me. You're not good enough, or you're not pretty enough, or, what do you have to cry for? What do you have to be depressed for? And so therapy is something that helped me a lot. And I'm the one in the family that broke that cycle of don't go to therapy to go to a therapist, because I'm the only one in my family that's accepting that I need help, and I need help, professional help. Right. And so therapy helped me a lot, because I see my therapist once a week, and I'm not ashamed to say, right? I'm living with a mental health condition. I'm living with PTSD, depression, and bipolar disorder. And the same way I take my treatment for my physical condition, the same way I do treatment for my mental health condition. And mental health is nothing to be ashamed of. Um, it doesn't limit what you can achieve. You know, you could live a successful life with a mental health condition. And that's what we do at NAMI, is we educate families, right? We let them know that mental health condition is just like a physical condition. I heard somebody talked about, praying it away. That's what my pastor said to me with my daughter. You just need to pray it away, because my daughter is also living with PTSD and bipolar disorder. And they said, just got to pray it away. You need to pray more. And ain't nothing wrong with praying. But if someone from the congregation comes to the pastor, comes to you guys and say, I have a heart condition, yes, you're going to pray with that person. But what you're going to do also, you're going to advise that person or encourage that person to see a cardiologist, right? A heart doctor. So you could pray with someone with a mental health condition, but also encourage them to see a psychiatrist or a therapist, right? It's just like any physical condition. I'm a cancer survivor and I'm living with diabetes, and I have to make sure I get my cancer screening every 6 months. I have to make sure I take my insulin shot, one in the morning, one at night. The same way I take one pill in the morning for my bipolar, my PTSD, and throughout the years, I've learned to replace those negative coping skills with positive ones. So even during this presentation, I have my eucalyptus candle burning beside me. I have a stress ball that I use. So throughout the years, I've learned to replace those negative ones with positive coping skills. And positive coping skills could look different for everyone, right? Journaling, walk in the park, right? Breathing. At NAMI, we have a breathing exercise called the 5-4-3-2-1 breathing exercise. And so I say all that to say that NAMI actually saved my life, because coming to New York and getting involved with NAMI, where we could walk in a support group and we could see 12, 15 families around the table that looks like us, have similar issue like us. There's no blame, there's no judging, there's no criticism, right? And so once I walked into that first support group at NAMI and I saw that, it's a community of families that are looking for support, are looking for education. That's where I felt my calling started, because I've been with NAMI now for 22 years, and I don't see myself working for another organization but NAMI, because mental health is my passion. And I educate family members. We have different support group at NAMI. The NAMISC.org website will give you a list of support groups. We have educational classes. We have the family class that loved ones could take if they're a caregiver for a loved one with mental health condition. We have a class started 2 weeks ago. Every Monday, we have 25 parents in the class, right? They just wanted information. They want information and support. They want to feel like they're a part of a community of support that would help them, and talk about mental health condition. We talk about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of, right? The same way I could talk about my diabetes and my cancer with my friends, the same way I talk about my mental health condition. And the same way I have to do those positive coping skills, eat right, get enough sleep, exercise. For my diabetes, the same goes for my mental health condition. And we all have stressors. We all live with stressors on a day-to-day basis, but how do we deal with those stressors? How do we handle them? Do we handle them in a negative way or in a positive way? So I would encourage you guys to, go to the NAMI website, um, and see all those services and support groups, and all our programs are free. We have support group for the Black community. We have for the Hispanic. We have support groups and classes, and they're all free. So thank you guys for listening to my part of the story. And if you guys have any questions, after the webinar, I'm an open book. Ask me anything.
Thank you so much for speaking, Ms. Denise. Hopefully everyone got to understand a little bit more in regards to that generational trauma and how it is passed down and how it does affect you in your everyday life. So next we have breaking the cycle. So Sister Taronda.
Okay, thank you, Miss Denise. That was an awesome story and an awesome testimony of overcoming. I'm encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you.
So breaking the cycle, culturally informed therapies, support groups, and community-based interventions can help individuals and communities heal from generational trauma and break the cycle of intergenerational transmission. Access to mental health services and trauma-informed care is critical for supporting individuals and families that are affected by generational trauma. And below, you'll see some of the coping mechanisms that some of them have already been mentioned: spirituality and faith, cultural expression, family and community support, resilience and adaptation, education and empowerment, seeking professional help, cultural healing practices, and advocacy and social justice, excuse me. So when you know more, you do more. You know, you just got to reach out and do that. And then our quote by Olivia Wilson says, building strong families is an ongoing process. So even like you, Miss Denise, you broke the cycle, you broke the generational cycle of abuse and alcoholism. So you are an encouragement to us all. Keep going. You are a perfect example, and everybody sees your strength. We hear your strength. So if she can do it, we all can do it. And if anybody is on here that's stuck and found themselves in this situation, keep going. There is an end to it. And in our conclusion, generational trauma with the African American community is a complex phenomenon shaped by historical injustices, contemporary challenges, and cultural resilience. It is imperative that we acknowledge the impact of trauma, support healing and resilience, and advocate for systemic change to promote social justice and equity. Resources for further support and education. There are organizations, books, websites, and helplines that are dedicated to supporting individuals and communities that are affected by generational trauma. They can provide valuable resources and assistance. So all this stuff that we just talked about today, it is available at your fingertips. If you Google it, I promise you something will come up that will help you for whatever area that you're in.
Now here is the question and answer section of the presentation. So we open the floor. Do anyone have any questions? It could be for Ms. Denise, it could be for the moderators. Any questions? I do not see any questions in our chat. But if you have a question, you can just unmute yourself.
Well, Madam Chair, I really don't have a question. I have comments.
Okay.
I would like to say thank you for all who have participated to this webinar tonight, because it takes a lot of courage to get on here and express what you have gone through as a childhood. It may be many of us who are on here and may have been affected by some of the different things that were mentioned, but I just want to say this has been a very, very beneficial webinar for me. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? I see. We do have a comment. Thank you for sharing your story, Ms. Chive. What is the name of the website you were referring to?
It's NAMISC.org. You can find all our support groups, all our classes, our community conversations. We have a new one called Sharing Hope, where we come into the community. We could either have conversations with faith-based leaders, with families, or with young adults on mental wellness and the barriers for African Americans seeking treatment. And why don't we seek treatment? Why don't we talk about mental health? So that's a community conversations that we could have. So
We had a comment. This was a great and informational. Thanks to all the speakers. Very informational. Thank you for all for sharing. Any other questions or comments?
I put my
I have
email
one
in
more for
I'm
I have
sorry.
one more for Miss Denise. I understand you work at NAMI, and what are I know you mentioned some of the programs, but how many weeks do they range from? Is it 2 to 4 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, or it's just whatever you feel comfortable with attending?
So we have presentations that like for 45 minutes to an hour. Those are the presentations that we do. We have discussions, which is an hour and a half, who wants to come into the community. And then we have a more structured classes. So we have a class called Family to Family, which is for family members of loved ones. So if you have a daughter, son, sibling, spouse, partner, wife, husband, parents that's living with mental health condition, you could take that 8-week course. It's a more structured course, and you get a curriculum. You get a handout every week. You get your curriculum full with information. It's taught by 2 trained leaders. And that's for caregivers or loved ones of adults. And then we have a 6-week course for families and caregivers of young adults, like under 18. So the discussions are a little different. Like in the basics class, we talk about, we help parents keep record of their child's treatment plan. We talk about medication. We talk about the brain. We talk about 504, IEPs, how to communicate with the school, the treatment team, the juvenile justice system. And then the family to family are more, the conversations are a little different, where we talk about housing, living will, who's going to take care of our loved ones after we're gone. So we help families put those documents together, and we talk about empathy and how to step in our loved one's shoes for not even a day, a couple of hours, and see what they go through, what someone goes through when they're living with mental health condition, the day-to-day struggles, getting up, going to school, going to work, handling those day-to-day stressors. So there's, depending on what you're looking for, on our website, we have all the information and the details on. And then we have support groups. We have support groups where for Black families could attend. We have for Hispanic families. We have for LGBTQ families. We have for support group for the individual living with the illness themselves that could attend our support. It's a recovery support group. So we have a array of, depending on what you're looking for.
Okay, well, thank you for that wealth of information.
You're welcome.
We did have another question that came, well, 2 questions that came in. Are all the services free to the public?
Yes. All the services are free. We don't ask for insurance. The only thing, we don't serve children. We don't do direct services. We work more with the family around education, support, advocacy. But all our services are free. We don't even ask you your, legal status. We don't need none of that stuff. You come to us and you say, hey, I have a loved one with a mental health condition, or I'm living with a mental health condition. What are services that can help me? And we give you an array of services.
And then the last one, it says, this was an excellent presentation. Do you all have any other resources that you all could share? Because there could be some sisters among us who may be suffering in silence.
That's a great question. And if that, I put my email in the chat box, if that person could shoot me an email and I could send you some resources, or I could put some stuff in the mail for you. We have little booklets or pamphlets, talks about what helps, how to recognize mental health condition, in your loved ones. We go over all the mental health conditions, and then we have, we also have a resource guide. So each region, we have a resource guide. We had upstate, Greenville, Myrtle Beach, Columbia area. And there's referrals in there. There's different services, but we have booklets and pamphlets at the office that we could put in the mail for you. So whoever that person is, just shoot me an email. My email is in the chat box, and just let me know. I could put some stuff in the mail for you, or I could email you some stuff.
Okay, thank you. And I think that is all the questions. Just double checking the chat box. So if there's no other questions, we can actually start closing out. Sister Taronda. I think you're still on mute. Okay, give us 1 second. Let's so that we don't hold up the rest of the webinar. Here on our screen, we would like for you to either scan or you can type in the web link for the survey. We do appreciate your feedback on our presentation this evening. So please take a few minutes to either scan the QR code or put the link in your web browser. Sister Tamika, do you have any closing thoughts before we close out?
I would just like to thank everybody again for attending. And if you have any questions, feel free to message us afterwards.
And again, we say thank you. And this is just a kind of a departing quote for everyone. Just live in the moment. So hopefully you were informed, inspired. Like we said, you can reach out to any one of us. You can go to the NAMI.org website for more resources. But do keep in touch. If you haven't already done it, make sure you scan the QR code or put the link in your web browser to fill out our survey. We highly do appreciate you all, and y'all have a good evening.